Welcome to the recorded version of Helping Seniors with Loss of Independence, part of the Family Caregiver Support webinar series brought to you by the American Society on Aging and a generous sponsorship from Home Instead Senior Care.
Our presenter today is going to be Molly Carpenter. Author, speaker, trainer, and family caregiver, Molly Carpenter brings years of personal and professional senior care experience and training to families dealing with dementia care. In her current role, Molly works with a team responsible for ensuring that the Home Instead Senior Care Network's 60,000 caregivers worldwide have the resources necessary to effectively provide quality care in the home and understand the importance of their work enhancing the lives of those they serve. Molly holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Family Science with a gerontology specialization from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and a Master's degree in Education with a gerontology specialization from the University of Nebraska-Omaha. And with that, I would like to welcome our presenter, Molly Carpenter. Thanks for being with us today, Molly.
Thank you, Steve, for such a nice, warm welcome. And I would like to just echo Steve's welcome to all of you out there today, too. We really do understand how busy your days are every day, and so taking the time out to further your career and learn more about these topics, it's so important, and we're so grateful that you've done that. So just want to say thank you to all of you out there who have joined the webinar today. Now, today's topic, I think I say this a lot, but it really is an important one, and it is a sensitive topic. And when we talk about losing independence, coping with the changes that aging can bring, it's tough for all of us. Even though it's a gradual thing and it can start slow, I'll give you a personal example. I'm nearing 40. And I need reading glasses now. And maybe some of you out there are getting older and you're starting to feel more aches and pains that you aren't used to. And so I think about those things and how that's affecting me. And then when I go to what it will be like when I'm an age of a senior and the changes are happening faster and they're more noticeable and they might be affecting the person harder. And so losing independence, in my opinion, might be the toughest, if not one of the toughest changes to cope with. So as we go through this today, I ask you to keep all of that in mind and to think about as you're talking with seniors and you're talking with families, to really even just remind people of how hard this really is to age well and to age gracefully. And when we consider losing independence, how tough of a road that is. I want to illustrate the importance, though, of being independent on the next slide. And I just want to start with a couple of little statistics here, but when you think about a senior and you think about them aging home, it's that one word. It's where seniors want to be. It's that place where seniors want to age. And that one word, home, it brings up all kinds of those good feelings like safety and love and warmth and family. It's a place where we all want to be, and it's a place we're most comfortable, and it's a place where seniors want to age. So it's no wonder that nearly 90% of seniors say home is where they want to stay. Now, there's a lot of reasons why a senior wants to stay home or why all of us want to age in place. And one of those, and we've got to think about the fear, though, what comes with aging in place and aging at home. And one of the biggest fears is that loss of independence or having to leave the home. And seniors want to avoid becoming a burden on their families, and they want to maintain their current lifestyle and their current life. And they often end up denying their very real need for care and sometimes can make bad decisions so that they can remain at home. So that's why we put this webinar on today, and it's so important for those adult children and others caring for seniors to look for those warning signs that their senior or their aging loved one might need help. Ignoring these signs can lead to some kind of more traumatic issue and maybe some sort of dependence in the future that the senior is so desperately trying to avoid. Learning the process of aging takes time. It's a good thing it is so gradual for all of us that it's starting at 40 for me, but it's good it takes time. But it also takes family involvement. It takes children. It takes siblings. It takes the senior's social friends and their social aspects of their life. And it takes a village almost to really look at aging and how to age well and how to age the way that people want to age. I'm going to discuss today how we can really help our caregivers, our family caregivers, recognize the signs of aging and really be able to maybe identify possible solutions and needs for additional care and services. So specifically, let's look at the objectives on the next slide. We are going to discuss some easily identifiable signs that you can suggest that family caregivers look for, and they kind of fall into three categories: physical symptoms and emotional or mental changes. Loss of attention is another category that I would consider loss of attention. And the third sort of category I would say is environmental clues. Now there's probably a lot more, but these are sort of the three big ones where family members can look for signs that things are changing and that there might need to be a new solution to come up with some problems that aging is causing. We're going to also talk about a number of ways that caregivers can take action to ensure that their senior has the assistance they need to live life safely and comfortably in their home or wherever they want to call home. Now, I want to start off today sort of why we have this whole webinar, why we have this topic today, and I already alluded to it a little bit, but why is getting old so hard? And it was interesting to ponder this question. And on the next slide, I want you to think about some questions we have up there. But first of all, growing old is not for sissies. I don't know if you guys have all heard that quote. It's a famous quote by Betty Davis. And I think I agree with her. Boy, was she right. When we look at seniors, we might think of things like, wow, they don't have a care in the world. They've raised their children. They've completed their education. Maybe they've had a career, and now they're no longer slaves to the work week. I mean, they're enjoying their life, their interests, their hobbies. They're doing whatever they want to do. But we all know that aging comes with a lot of stressors as well. So let's look at this from an emotional or a psychological standpoint today and put ourselves in their shoes. And that's where those three questions come into play. These are some of the questions that our seniors or our grandparents or our aging neighbors or aging loved ones are facing. Will my life lose its meaning if I'm no longer useful? Think about that for a second. People always want to feel validated. They want to feel useful. They want to feel like they're still contributing to the world. So if they're having those questions is, what if I'm no longer at work? Or what if I'm no longer, if you're an older senior, what if you're no longer able to do your volunteer work or rake your yard or whatever? If you're not feeling useful and you're not feeling like you're still contributing, how hard must that feel? And so think about those kind of questions. The second one is, will I lose my independence and need to rely on others? This is a common question that seniors are facing as they begin aging. And so we can't even think about relying on others and losing independence physically, but we have to think about mentally as well. People fear being weak and needy. We're all raised to be independent. It's sort of noble and strong to be independent. So having to rely on others, it just goes completely against our grain, completely against what society tells us we should be. And so it's really hard for us to want to accept help and from others as we're aging. So again, we have to challenge our family caregivers to put themselves in the senior's shoes and really try to have empathy and understanding of what is happening to their loved one. Now, it's important to give some context to this issue. So I want to go, as seniors are facing these questions, on the next slide I want to look at how seniors react to loss and life changes. And here's some of the common reactions that seniors, when they're faced with loss of independence or any loss that's associated with aging. And I start with fear. I think, I'll tell you, turning 40 is fearful sometimes, and I can imagine turning 80, how fearful that might be. Some people becoming frightened with new vulnerability and wondering how they're going to manage on their own. they might be fearful or overwhelmed, that they might begin to rely on people too much, or, again, become a burden for families and really, when, cause burden for a family caregiver, that's something they definitely want to avoid. There's also seniors who feel angry, feeling angry that they can no longer manage on their own. It's common. And this is the sad part is sometimes that anger is expressed or taken out on their loved ones or their caregivers that are caring for them. And when you think about feeling angry, it's frustrated. Maybe they can't, maybe driving at night is hard now, so they can't drive at night anymore. Or, just think of any kind of a situation that a senior might be facing, and anger could become an emotion and a reaction to this loss. Seniors are also feeling guilt. Some may feel guilty. They may refuse help when needed, so they don't want to ask for help because they feel guilty asking for help. And again, we all know what happens when that happens, that not getting help can lead to a situation that could cause them harm or cause them to fall or, put their safety at risk. So there is some guilt associated with asking and needing help. And then I think there's a lot of confusion. The seniors are feeling a lot of confusion during this time, not only about needing help, but just confusion about what's going to happen and, what does my future hold, and just sort of picturing the next 10 or 5 years and what that looks like. And so aging brings about so many emotions and reactions in people, and that's the hard part it's a hard part for everyone. And everybody is different. So when we think about this, when we think about the senior's perspective, when we think about their reaction, they could be experiencing all of these emotions at once or throughout this aging process, or maybe they're just stuck on one of the emotion. I know we've all worked with the gentleman who's so frustrated and angry all the time. I've had that person in my life before. I've had seniors in my life who are just fearful, and they become avoidant to activities and things because they're fearful of falling, and they're fearful of, it's a pride thing, they're fearful of showing their weakness and showing that aging's kind of catching up with them. So we've all can think of people that have experienced these different emotions. Now, I just think it's important when we're visiting with family caregivers and talking to family caregivers that we share some of these things and be able to have these sort of reactions to loss at the top of our mind so that we can help family caregivers understand where the senior is at possibly. Now, there's some things that a family caregiver can do or say to help a loved one through some of these times. And things like that include reminding, and a lot of, by the way, before I go there, a lot of you work directly with seniors as well. So these are some great tips for you, but it's about reminding them that these feelings are normal. And it's a normal response to aging. It's a normal response to the situation to be fearful or nervous or confused. And I think sometimes when you do that, when people realize that they're in the same boat as others and that it's normal, this can be comforting in itself. Families can also encourage their loved one to take each day or each change one by one or step by step. Remind seniors that this is typical, or that this happens, that this is how the aging process goes, and that I think a lot of times people typically start to think so far in the future, and they have one little situation, maybe a fall, and they think, oh no, I'm going to be in a nursing home and I'm going to die in 6 months. Let's really remind them to not look so far into the future, concentrate and live in the moment, and try to be happy where they're at that moment. I think that a lot of times we can all be negative, and so especially seniors, because again, a lot of things are changing and they're not positive things all the time. So I think all of us to keep encouraging the senior and the family to remain positive and to encourage the positive attitude, it will go a long way. There are some positive things that come with aging. We talked about them earlier. You don't have to go to work every day for 40 hours a week or whatever. There's just a lot of things that you can think about that are positive that comes with aging. I know it's a new concept for the world, but think about aging and the positive things that can come with aging. Another good tip to share with families is to really encourage the senior not to compare how things were when it comes to abilities. This is a hard one, but it can be helpful for seniors when they're reacting to loss. So we've all heard a senior do it many, many times where they'll say, well, I used to be able to do this or that, or I used to jog 5 miles a day, and now I can only walk, 5 blocks. So I think it's hard to do, but if we could encourage seniors not to compare to their old abilities, it can go a long way. We can also change that subject if that does come up pretty quickly and really try to redirect the conversation to something different. Okay, now there's many signs that family caregivers can look for. On the next slide, I want to start by looking at the physical signs of aging so that we can help family caregivers recognize these warning signs and prompt some action. Excuse me, pardon me, I had a little tickle in my throat. So some of the signs that you can share with family caregivers or some things to look for is, does their senior loved one or their parent seem tired all the time? Have they lost are they not their usual energetic self? Maybe when they call their parents or neighbor or their aging loved one, are they waking him or her from a nap? I know we can all tell when we call somebody and we've accidentally woken them up from a nap. That's a good sign. It's something to look for. Persistent fatigue and loss of energy are just two of the physical signs that a parent might be struggling and may need some extra attention. And it's one of those situations where over time, if it's a chronic where they're always calling and waking them up for a nap, if you wake them up occasionally, that's probably nothing to worry about. But it's just changes in the routine and changes in their normal behavior. The other thing to advise caregivers is that when they're visiting a senior loved one, they should take note if they're having difficulty getting up from a chair or the couch or wherever, or are they unsteady when they're standing. You think about as you're sitting there and you invite somebody to, maybe they're going to get up and open the door or they're going to get up and answer the phone. Those are things that family caregivers should start looking for and ensure that everything is, they're still steady and there's no balance issues there. The other thing is about gait is understanding if there's any changes in the person's gait. Are they balancing themselves as they walk across the room to answer the phone? Are they, putting their arm on the couch or the chair and sort of using that as a guide as they go through to answer the phone? So I think it's, if they notice that their senior loved one or aging parent is having difficulty with mobility, the caregiver should maybe even take a closer look in the bathroom. There's some good signs in the bathroom, such as towel bars or windowsills or shower curtains. Checking to see if any of those are loose or are they pulled away from the wall or is the shower curtain torn. That might give further insight in changes in gait or balance or mobility issues. So those are just some things to advise family caregivers to look for. Now, some other physical symptoms of underlying health issues are the loss of appetite and weight loss. Ask the caregiver to think about or to see if, are they hearing words such as, I'm not hungry, and that's untypical, or the caregiver should really begin to check over grocery lists. And on the list, is there more junk food items or those really easy to prepare meals that might be lacking nutritional value? Those are some things that are good clues. The other thing is checking the refrigerator kind of on a regular basis and the cupboards. Are there any signs of poor nutrition in those areas? Is the refrigerator is it almost bare? Or does it have all kinds of sweet foods or foods that are, grab and go and easily packaged, so that may have some poor nutrition in them as well. So those are just some things to consider talking to the family caregiver about. And looking for signs is actually words of I'm not hungry, but then looking for signs for different areas of food and cupboards and refrigerators. Now, what about hearing loss or vision problems? Are caregivers noticing mom or dad asking them to repeat the question you just asked or speak louder? Or is the TV volume really loud? I know when I used to call my grandmother, I'd always have to wait a minute for her to turn down the TV before we started our conversation, because the TV was way too loud and there was no way we could talk and she could hear me and the loud TV, or I could barely hear her with such a loud TV. And then when you think about vision, with my grandmother, I noticed she started to use her magnifying glass more often to do her word searches. So there's these little changes that families should really be looking out for as they're, stopping by and visiting and calling. There's just all these little nuances that you can share with families so that they can understand if there's any cause of concern. Now, what about the emotional symptoms? Let's look at those on the next slide. Recognizing emotional signs of aging doesn't take a lot of time, and sometimes these symptoms can even be picked up over the phone. As we've said on the previous slide, when caregivers talk to their parents, they can ask how they're feeling, and they can get a sense of if they're still engaged in their usual social activities. Are they still going to church services and meeting friends for coffee, if that's what they used to do? Caregivers are noticing that their parents have lost interest in socializing or maybe have stopped participating in those former hobbies. This could be a signal of depression. It's also possible that there's an underlying physical health issue causing their parent to back away from things that they once enjoyed. So that goes back to that pride, or they're worried they're going to fall and don't want to be out. And I go back to my grandmother again. She missed a few church sessions in a row because she said she didn't feel up to it. And that's okay. We kind of listened to that. But then after the third one, we really stopped and tried to figure out what was wrong and why that she wasn't going to church anymore. And she did end up telling us that it was her friend who drove her to church. She was having health problems. And my grandmother didn't want to tell us that. She didn't want us to drive and get her and take her to church every week. She didn't want to be the burden. So there's even that issue that could be underlying of why seniors may not be participating in social activities anymore. So there's some probing. There's an art to probing and figuring really out what's happening. Now, eventually she stopped going to church because of health issues, but that was 2 years more down the road. So again, it's really important to try to understand what is going on and why they might be avoiding these social activities. Now, sometimes the signals to caregivers, they can be drastic, such as a major change in mood or outlook. Maybe they've noticed that their loved one is happy one minute and crying the next minute, or maybe they're crying more often than they usually did, or more weepy. Maybe they're coming across more irritable or grumpy than normal. Now, we need to advise our family caregivers that we should not ignore these signs. They should keep an eye out to see if they stretch over a few days or weeks. And if they do persist, that's when we need to think about getting a doctor involved or looking for potential solutions. The caregiver also might check with friends and neighbors to see if they've noticed any behavior changes as well. So again, a lot of these emotional signs can be even picked up over a telephone call. And then by doing some work and talking to neighbors, that could be another sign. So the one action item when you're thinking about emotional symptoms, we all tend to do this and we overgeneralize, or we say, she's been moody for 2 weeks. So I would encourage you to have family caregivers really even write a little journal note or a little note in a notebook, like Mom was extra sad today, and really track how often that is happening, just to sort of it puts everybody at ease when you can really look back and see how long it was or wasn't. So it's just, again, to avoid that over getting very nervous and stressed out. When you actually write it down, it feels a little bit better, and you can actually see how long it's been to really understand if it's a big problem or not. Okay. As you know, these are not the only signs of concern. So let's look on the next slide, loss of attention signals and environmental cues. Now let's start with appearance. A lot of things with appearance that can be signs that there's an issue underneath or an issue at hand. Is clothing wrinkled? How about, is the clothing dirty, or does it have spots on their clothes, on the shirt or pants? With my grandmother, she couldn't always see the spots on her clothes. So when she wore something that had spots, we knew that it had to be washed. This was sort of our signal, though, that we should probably start doing her laundry for her. We also started putting outfits together for her every night. She would pick it out, or we would pick it out and hang it out for the next day so she could just grab and go. That's just a little side tip. But looking at somebody's appearance, their clothes, their personal hygiene is another big one. This is noticeable. I think one of the big ones is with men. Maybe they haven't shaved in a while, so it's pretty noticeable. If a man's always had a clean-cut shave and now all of a sudden there's stubbles, for example. And then maybe the grooming habits just seem off. A lot of ladies are used to getting their hair done, and they have their hair put up, or maybe they put makeup on, and so if you start noticing makeup's not going on anymore, hair looks a little messy, these are all signs to share with a family that something could be going on, something could be changing in the person's life. The other thing, let's talk about driving. If the senior is still driving, we could encourage family caregivers to go on a ride with them to look for those diminished driving skills, and those are things like slow response time, or maybe rolling through stop signs, missing turns, or maybe even not being able to read signs. Or I've had this one happen before, braking quickly to avoid a rear end situation or rear-ending somebody. So I think, of course, when we encourage family caregivers to go on the ride along, maybe you just encourage them to stay in the neighborhood. But that's one way to look for concerns with driving. The other way is to really checking the car over, maybe looking for mystery dents or scratches that weren't there before, sort of noticing if there's any changes to the car on the outside. That might be a lot safer way, and it can provide some great clues onto the family caregiver if driving is a worry or a concern. Other signs that caregivers can look for that demonstrate that maybe the senior is having trouble, it could be mishandling medication, and this is a big one. I think families should carefully examine prescription bottles, checking the refill date against the number of pills that are in the bottle to really help determine if their senior loved one is taking their medications regularly. Also, caregivers can call the pharmacy and check on whether refills are being ordered at the right time. So there's just some things that a family caregiver can do to look and make sure that medications are being taken properly. Or how about if they're missing appointments? Are they missing a doctor's appointment? Are they missing their favorite TV show or card game? These are signs of diminishing concentration. So getting a little spacey, getting a little forgetful. And again, this is something to watch over time to really understand if it's a big concern or just maybe they just missed it that day or whatever. Memory loss and forgetfulness and confusion, those can be revealed by missed doctor's appointments. So maybe it's, I just went to the doctor last week, but this week it's a different doctor for different health issues. So that's a pretty interesting sign to really show a family that the memory could be fading and they could need some additional help or diagnosing. Maybe the person's calling repeatedly and asking the same questions. Maybe they're calling the caregiver at odd hours. Those are causes for concern. When we talk about memory loss, poor judgment, there's lots of ways that families can see if there's poor judgment with what a person's doing. And then I think it's just important to have those warning signs of Alzheimer's disease that are helpful. That the Alzheimer's Association has those on their website, and those are just great warning signs to refer to families if there's something deeper than just concentration issues or having a bad week, if it's a consistent problem. So we're not going to go over these today because we have done it in a webinar earlier this year, but recognizing those warning signs, I know all of you are very familiar with those, and helping a family recognize them will be very helpful. Now, before we take a look at action, I want to talk about one last place that caregivers could look for clues, and that is in their senior loved ones' environments. Now, and that is on the next slide. Sorry. What we want to do is really advise family caregivers that the next time they visit their loved one, really take a close look around. Now, we've talked about some of these signs before, like looking in the refrigerator, looking in the freezer, looking in drawers. Has food spoiled? And is it because the person isn't eating, or is there nothing in the refrigerator, or have they not gone to the store so the refrigerator looks pretty bare? The other thing is looking at the house and housekeeping. Is there any home maintenance issues? Is there cleanliness issues anywhere? Even when you think about, is there lots of dust on the furniture? Is the carpet looked unclean or unvacuumed? And again, looking for, is there a tear in the carpet or a tear in a chair? Kind of those home maintenance signs are good things to look for a family to understand really what's happening and if things are progressing. The furniture, looking at the top of furniture, looking at countertops, are dishes piling up in the sink? Now, these are pretty obvious signs, dishes piling up, but the dust is not super obvious all the time. So it's just something good to remind families to look for as they're in the house. What about floors and stairways? Has the senior loved ones, maybe if they're, have they spilled things that maybe they haven't known they spilled, or maybe they have Parkinson's or something, their hands are shaking, or maybe they've dropped something, they haven't wiped it up good enough on the floor. So it's really important for families to check floors and carpets and walkways, and really maybe even under the bed. If things have fallen under the bed and they can't see them to pick them up, those are good signs or good clues of really understanding what's going on. It's also a good time to encourage the family to check for safety concerns. Are there frayed carpets? Are there throw rugs? Are there objects and furniture creating tripping hazards? So is there too much clutter in the way? Is there newspapers piling up? There's lots of things, and we've done webinars on safety before as well. But these are, again, when we're talking about environmental clues, pointing the safety checklists out and really having families take a hard look at that is important. I know with my grandmother, she loved throw rugs, and my aunt would always remove her throw rugs. But somehow when we were little, she would talk my sister or I into getting them back out, and she'd say something like, well, it's going to rain and or it's going to snow and people need to wipe their feet. And so she could always talk us grandkids into putting those rugs back out. But at the time, we didn't realize they were safety issues, but we soon learned that that was the reason why the rugs were gone. But it's just important for families to really not only explain why they're changing things or moving things, but also to really look for those safety concerns. And when you think about clutter, that's another sign of maybe even concentration, or is the senior having difficulty organizing things or getting to things to read? Are they not keeping up on their newspaper or their books that they always read or their magazines? Are they piling up and maybe creating a tripping hazard? That's really the biggest concern. I think it's good, though, for families to work with their senior loved one and work together on organizing. One family I came across that I worked with had this clutter issue, and it was kind of a pretty big clutter issue, almost a borderline hoarding issue. And they approached it as, you know what, we're going to go through and we're going to donate items to people that need all of these things that are piling up. And it even worked to say there's a lot of important things in here that people like to archive, like magazines, like the Time magazines or the National Geographics. I mean, people look for those really important issues. So helping the senior loved one realize that they're passing this down and it's going to a good home and that somebody's going to get use out of it, or even passing down special things to the family. That's how this family kind of went at this issue with clutter with their senior loved one, and it worked fairly well. Lastly, another area to look at in environment is the mail. And thinking about our bills being paid on time, our correspondence being answered. If not, it could be a sign of something serious. That was, I'll tell you, was a sign for our family because my grandmother always wrote letters. And when she got a letter in the mail, she answered it right away. I remember the time when she didn't answer right away. And she always wanted us to read the letter that she got from her cousin in California. So I would read the letter, and then I'd say, well, what did you say back to Libby? And she said, well, I haven't gotten back to her yet. You know, that was a sign that things were changing. And it was a sign of she wasn't able to write very well anymore. She couldn't see as well anymore. That's when shortly after, you know, my aunt started to take over paying bills, because if she wasn't able to write her letters back, we knew that our bills weren't going to be paid on a timely manner either. So the good news is that she would just call her sister or her cousin in California instead of writing. So we had a solution for that, but the point is that it was a sign to our family that we needed to get a little bit more involved in her day-to-day mail and her day-to-day paying of bills and that sort of a task. So it's just the little nuances that you notice that we have to encourage families to look out for. So what can family caregivers do to help their aging loved one? You know, let's look at some action steps on the next slide that we can share with family caregivers. Now, the first step to ensure that their parents' well-being is for the caregiver to actually share their concerns. This is, I think it's an overlooked step in the process. A lot of times as family caregivers, we just walk in and start fixing things, start doing things, because that's what we want to do. We want to help, right? Well, I think it's important to first encourage families to talk openly and honestly with their loved one. Even consider including other people that maybe that care for the person into the conversation. We may even encourage family members to have a prepared notes or a list or whatever it is. Like I said earlier, if there's a journal being kept, bring those things with. It helps people stay on track, and it really helps them stay focused to what they want to talk about, and it really gives them an opportunity to express their concerns to the loved one, showing how really, truly, concerned they are or worried they are about the situation. The other, next step that a caregiver should do is really encourage the aging parent to schedule a medical checkup, especially if they've noticed any of these warning signs, the physical warning signs, if there's weight loss or a change in mood. It's also important then for the family caregiver to ask about follow-up visits. I think a lot of times we're kind of all used to now getting a yearly physical. That's sort of built into what we do now in the society. But seniors didn't always have the yearly physical. So by encouraging a medical checkup and then having follow-up sessions can really not only help the family understand changes, but the doctor and the nurses can understand if there's been a change from the last visit to the present visit. And so it's important for family caregivers to stay involved in the process. Maybe they either go to the visits or they at least call and do follow-up visits after they've come home from the doctor just to understand any changes in medications or maybe any new therapies that have been prescribed, so on and so forth. it's just important for families to understand if there's a new set of directions and if they could help the person, remind them about, like, if it's a new medication and a new medication schedule. It's just good to have another person there to listen and be helpful during the appointment and afterwards to execute what happened on the appointment. The other thing is if the caregiver's done a safety evaluation or has walked through the house, or maybe they've had one of you all, if you're an OT or PT, maybe they've come out and done a safety evaluation of the house, it's important for them to put a plan together. And when you think about this addressing safety issues, there's, a two-pronged approach, so to speak. First is pointing out the safety issues, and secondly, that's when we make the plan to put them together. The changes needed could be as simple as better lighting, again, removing rugs, or other potential hazards. The caregiver may need to install grab bars in the bathroom to prevent falls, or a handrail outside on steps. And so we've talked about communication in the past, and in these situations, that conversation about why these things are happening and the tone of the conversation will really make or break the situation. So it's great if a family not only points out some safety concerns to their loved one, but also comes with solutions and also involves the person along the way as they're putting a new safety plan in place or making some changes to their house. When we think about driving, if the senior's not capable of driving anymore, or maybe they're having, some of the other things we've talked about, like trouble with grooming, or they can't get to the grocery store, or any of those big issues that we've talked about, it might be time to consider home care services. Now, as a lot of you know, there's wonderful people and companies out there that do everything from cleaning the house to preparing meals to going to the grocery store to reminding you to take medications. And they can also help with the daily activities such as bathing and dressing. So that's something to consider along the way for a family caregiver. There's also a variety of community services that might need to be considered. There's lots of resources in the community. There's the local agencies or councils on aging. They can be a great resource for help and information. A lot of those types of groups offer different assessment services. They help with sign-up or, assisting with sign-up for care as needed. This is where things like Meals on Wheels comes into play, or a bath aid that might be necessary. So it's always good to check with local resources as well. Family caregivers, another action step, really should encourage their loved one to remain as engaged and active as possible. Again, I think that's one that's overlooked occasionally, but family caregivers need to stay positive as well and remind their senior loved one or their parent or their neighbor, whoever it is, to keep as active and engaged as possible. It's also important to note that if the caregiver's senior loved one dismisses their concerns, we have to encourage that caregiver not to be discouraged. It's important to remember that these things take time, and they usually take many conversations. Staying patient and not pushing will be an important message to get across. Encouraging the family maybe even to get the doctor involved if necessary to really help move some of these concerns into action steps. I think the other thing is going along the lines of staying patient and that these things take time. There also can be different strategies to try over time. So if they've tried one way to get a message across or tried to make a change about throw rugs, for example, in my family, there's probably another way to handle it or another way to tackle that issue or concern. So again, trying different strategies to achieve the goal, that's okay too. And I think that's an important thing to convey. I've also got to just talk about that encouraging a sense of control. Now, when you think about control, we think about as a person feels more confident and in control, they can execute plans, and they can be successful at putting new plans or in the business world we say processes in place. And what I mean is is if there's a walker, for example, if the person feels confident and in control and they need to start using the walker, they will start using the walker successfully. So it's sort of a mindset. But what happens is we've got to let the senior have some control in their everyday life. So we have to let them be involved in the process, and maybe they're even encouraging or okay with getting the walker in the end. So when you think about when the senior is still in control of their everyday life, they feel a lot better and more confident. Confidence leads to that executing plans successfully or making changes successfully. Personal control also leads to better health. So this is that whole mind over matter concept. I've talked a lot about it on these webinars, and I just think it's important to reiterate and show how important the attitude is in these situations. Families need to enable their loved one to still have control and still have opportunities to make choices. So how can we help them? Let's give families on the next slide some tips on how we can encourage them to have their senior stay in control. They can, of course, treating them as equal. You know, that's so important. This is all about dignity, about choice and control. We need to ensure that people are involved in the decisions, even if it's little decisions such as what to eat and what to wear and what time to go to bed, those types of things. We also need to assume that people are not able to make decisions. It never hurts to ask. Also, providing opportunities for the family member to participate as fully as they can. Maybe they can't participate in some of the decisions or the solutions, but even allowing them to be in the room and to talk about it and to chime in as necessary is important. And I think this is a big one, is putting the person's needs first should be at the forefront. And sometimes our family caregivers, they schedule things on their time, for example, or when they can do things. A lot of times that's necessary because maybe the caregiver works full time during the day, and when they go to schedule an appointment, it's on a Saturday or an evening when they can take the loved one to the doctor, for example. But evenings may not be the best time for the senior. So again, putting the senior's needs at first, and if that is a concern and there's no way around it, that's when hiring outside help might be a good option to relieve some of this stress. And then the last thing is about partnership. Encourage families to think of this situation as a partnership. And sometimes I think we should change the name from caregiver to care partner. Because when it's a partnership, both sides feel involved, both sides want success, both sides are looking for solutions together along the way. Okay? So I think that's a big one. I will say one more thing about this topic is I think, and I've talked about this before, about families consider doing with instead of doing for. Again, goes back to that partnership concept. It's easy for us caregivers to just walk in, come in, cook the meal, or buy the groceries, or put a casserole in the oven, instead of maybe we pick the senior up and we take them to the store together and we involve them in the process, or maybe they pick the recipe this week that we're going to try. So it's just little nuances to encourage our family caregivers so that they can be successful in this role, because this is one of the hardest jobs that they'll ever have to do. Okay, so we can encourage families to preserve dignity by allowing that choice and control. Now, let's talk about the seniors themselves. A lot of you work directly with seniors, so let's look at some tips on the next slide, how we can advise these seniors and how they should look at things when they're coping with loss of independence. First thing is to remember to be patient. Take things slow. It's okay to get the hang of this aging thing. It's going to take some time. And I think that's important for us to remind our seniors, and our family members can remind our seniors of these things too. Also, self-acceptance. Recognizing that losing independence, it is, like I said, one of the toughest things, but it's very common. It's not a sign of personal failure. It's just it's normal and natural, and it's sometimes a part of aging. So it just reminding them of that this could happen as people age. Also, allowing the senior to express their feelings of sad, frustrated. We talked about the emotions earlier. I think as aging professionals, saying things like, "This must be hard for you. having family members say that to their mom or dad, this must be hard for you. It goes a long way when someone is sad or frustrated. And always remaining open. It takes time to process. The senior, encouraging them to process the concerns they're hearing from the family, understanding that they're coming right from the heart. And, as I read these tips today on helping seniors, these can all go for the family caregiver as well. So having them practice patient, of course, that's a big one. Understanding true feelings, yes. If families understand their true feelings, they can articulate it clearly to the loved one. For example, don't drive is stemmed from the basic need of, I love you and I don't want you to be injured. So it's really a lot of these tips. Remaining open is a good tip for a family caregiver. And it just, so all of these tips can go both ways. They can be for the senior or the family caregiver. So before we get to resources, I have to end on a positive note with this one. And I want to challenge you all to think about what it means to age successfully. Because let's face it, aging has a bad rap out there, and a lot of us don't look forward to it. But we all know that attitude is half the battle. So let's look at some of the ideas on the next slide that we can encourage seniors and their families to practice and celebrate aging, as it says there, rather than dread it. And so it's funny that the research shows that if you've got a positive view of aging, you can actually stay healthier longer. That goes right over mind over matter. And I love that Mark Twain quote on the slide. Age is an issue of mind over matter. If you don't mind, it doesn't matter. That's kind of a funny quote. But I think thinking about having a positive view will help us stay healthier longer. And again, celebrating age, accepting meaning and purpose in life, adapting is one of those key skills that we all need to have. And so the key to change is to embrace it and accept it. And accept that it isn't right or wrong, it's just different. We also want to always continue to learn and grow and set goals and continue to feel accomplished every day. So as we're aging, continuing to learn and grow is a great benefit, that we get to continue and learn and grow and learn new things all the time. I also think it's important to recognize failings. Our mistakes is what makes us who we are. It helps us learn. And so practicing those feelings and accepting those failings, seeing the good that can come out of them, it can help us all age better. And remember, age is just a number. We're hardwired to define people by that number on the birth certificate, but I encourage you to look past the number and see what is on the inside. And with that, let's look at the resources on the last slide. And I leave you with a few resources today. I know we're running a little low on time, but these are some of the places that we got some information for the webinar today. There's some great resources on caregiverstress.com. There's some great information on about National Volunteer Caregiving Network, the National Council on Aging. There's so many resources out there to help. Caring.com is another one that comes to mind. And so as we close on the next slide, I hope that you found this presentation helpful today and encouraging. We've gone over a lot, and it's likely that some of you are every day either talking to families or talking to seniors about loss of independence. So I hope you learned a lot, and I hope you learned some great tips to share with families. And so before the phone lines open up, I just want you to think about those questions on the slide. When can you schedule time with caregivers to discuss assessing their aging parents' needs? Or at least the second one, what resources will the caregiver need to find services that are available to the senior, and how can you assist? I know a lot of you have handy resources and lists and guides that you hand out to families all the time, but I encourage you to think about additional resources about, staying positive and how to accept change and some of those other things that go along with this topic. And then what strategies can you suggest to the caregiver that will assist their aging parent in staying independent? I again want to thank you all for your time today. I thank you all for the job you're doing. As we go through these webinars, I think all the time, you are all part-time therapists on the side, because you're having to talk to families and seniors and not only help them physically, but you're helping them emotionally get through and be better caregivers. So I just want to thank you again for all of your time. And with that, Steve, I'm going to turn it back over to you to open the phone lines up for questions and resource sharing.
Okay. Thanks very much, Molly. We also want to welcome Erin Albers from Home Instead Senior Care to the line, who's going to be joining us here for the Q&A portion. So welcome, Erin, and thanks for your presentation, Molly.
Thank you.
Okay, so as you said, Molly, it's time for some resource sharing and some questions. Let's share a resource tip here that just came in. This is a good one. I found that annual checkups are required by some insurances before scripts for maintenance meds can be rewritten. This is a good time for family caregivers to get updated with what is really going on, as they may not recognize what they're looking at. So thanks for that there.
That is an excellent tip. Thank you very much. That is, as you were reading that, Steve, I thought that's absolutely true. So I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that is a great way. And again, a medical professional can see lots of things that families probably don't see every day. So that's a great tip. Thank you for sharing.
Okay, this is a really good question here. So, Molly, the question is, how do you help a senior who is in denial? Tough one.
That is a very tough one. And, I know we didn't cover that specifically today in the webinar, but I think this involves a little bit of creativity about how do you help the person. Well, let's step back for a minute. When you think about denial, they're probably denying that they need help, or denying that they need care, or denying that something needs to change in their environment. And so I think sometimes in those situations, we really have to do a great job explaining what could happen without terrifying the person. Or if we've got a real-life example of what happened to somebody that didn't recognize X, Y, and Z sign, I'm thinking of a safety concern when I'm thinking about denial, and safety concern maybe even in the home. And so I think what I always encourage families, and I'm going to use an example just because denial, it could be in so many different caveats, but the example I'll use is if a senior loved one is having safety concerns at home and they're denying either leaving their home, or they're denying needing help or getting extra help, what I've always encouraged families to do is to start small and to start little. So if it's Meals on Wheels once or twice a week, just an entry point. You just need an entry point to get started. Maybe it's a situation where if you do want to hire a caregiver, it's for an hour or 2 hours a week, and it's just to go to the grocery store, or just to, whatever the little task could be. I found that when people, I just had a son ask me this question. Dad was in denial that mom needed help. This is a couple living together, and he said, I just can't get Dad to admit that he needs help and that my mom needs help. And I said, well, what if we suggested that Dad doesn't take mom to the doctor anymore, that we have a caregiver come for that 2 hours, takes mom to the appointment, Dad can do whatever he wants for those 2 hours, and then let's see how it goes. And sure enough, that actually did work. So I think sometimes, what happened is the caregivers started to take the spouse to the doctor, and she had very poor health issues, so she was at the doctor at least twice a month. And twice a month so 4 hours total, it really gave the dad this sense of freedom and that everything was going to be okay, and that they knew this caregiver and everything was fine. And so they gradually started to increase hours to get more and more help. So I think the thing is to really help them understand what is the consequence of the denial, or what, if they don't take action, what could happen. And I know you've probably done that before, but again, using real life examples. But the second thing is starting slow with the change that you want to implement, and find creative ways to do a smaller change. And thirdly, I think sometimes it's the doctor that has to be the one. They look at doctors as authority figures. So if you have to involve the doctor to help make the case, that might be what we good step to take.
All right, Molly. Well, we are just about out of time today. We've reached the end of our hour, but I want to thank you for a great presentation and for being with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.